Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Chiseled. Why do we call it Chiseled? Because we are all work in progress. I'm your host, Rob Commodari. I'm also the author of the book Better Than You Think and co-author of the book Next Level Your Life, co-author with Kyle Wilson today, our guest, and several other authors. Well, and I can sit here and say I met Kyle, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, and all I can say is he's the real deal. I mean, he's been impactful to me, inspiring to me. He's the founder of Jim Rohn International, for those who are in the whole personal growth and development world, who's like the guy, right? So Kyle was his business partner for over 18 years, and he's going to tell us a little bit about that journey. He's worked with top names in the industry like Brian Tracy, Les Brown. He even coached Darren Hardy for 3 years. Dennis Waitley, Mark Victor Hansen, and many others. And I've been a part of one of Kyle's groups. It's called his Inner Circle group, which Kyle might get to today. And I've been a part of that for a couple of years, and I can tell you it's impactful, it's inspiring, and you're just in a group of people that are loving and caring and just want to grow and learn. So, Kyle, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you being on the show, and thanks for being here.
Hey, Rob, always my honor. So appreciate you.
Yeah, thank you. And so my big question, the first question is, tell us about this your story, your journey, and how did you get this whole Jim Rohn thing, and how many, like, dozens of auditoriums you filled up. I'd love to hear the story and the journey.
Yeah, I get that asked a lot. How did you have the good fortune to work so closely with Jim Rohn? And it was the real deal. A lot of people talk about working with Jim Rohn, and if I've never heard of him, trust me, they didn't work with him. I founded Jim Rohn International in 1993. But the story behind that, similar to Jim talking about farm boy from Idaho, I grew up in a small town, never went to college. I've told my story before at the Inner Circle about doing drugs, the whole thing, selling drugs. Worse than I'm making it sound here. Had a spiritual experience at age 19. And that led me to starting my first little business. I was a small town, Vernon, Texas. I started a detail shop, cleaning cars. That turned into later a service station. That turned into the biggest station in town on the highway, open 24/7, Wilson's, Texaco. And, it was just intuitive marketing, connecting the dots. And little did I know I would end up getting a God whisper a couple of years later to sell my house, sell my business, move to Dallas. I say I didn't know anyone. I knew of a couple of people, had no job lined up. I thought, well, I'll just do in Dallas what I did in Vernon. I'll start a detail shop, which I did. And that all over a couple of years, very serendipitously led to, unbelievably, me getting in the seminar business. Kind of a long story, very much bigger than who I was and how I got into it. And I was told, well, you have to cold call. So you'll cold call companies to see if you can book yourself to go speak. So that was the first big thing, Rob. I had to learn to cold call. Second of all, I had to learn to speak, which I was totally uncomfortable with. And I still am. I'm not a speaker. I'm a marketer. I'm a strategist. But I was in such a bubble of how I got this opportunity. And we've all had those moments, right? We're in this bubble. Ignorance is bliss. Like, we don't even know that we're playing way above what we're supposed to be playing. There's no past history that would say we should be trying to attempt what we're trying to attempt. But I was in that bubble and I went for it. So I learned to speak, to give a presentation. I did the deal. I'd make the 100 cold calls. I'd book myself to go speak, and then learned how to do a pre-manager. And then afterwards, give an opportunity to go buy tickets to an event I was putting on with the company I was working for. And I got pretty good at it, Rob. In fact, I became their top person. And the problem was, it was a broken model. I wasn't making any money, and I'm their top guy. So I decided to go out on my own. And we were getting a couple of hundred people for a one-day event. And I had this mantra: how do I get 2,000 people in a room? How do I get 2,000 people in a room? And over a period of about a year, it started to play out. And I would go to a new city every 3 months: Chicago, Baltimore, Washington, Kansas City, Sacramento, Los Angeles. And we would put on eventually 2,000 people. Eventually, actually 2,600 people was the biggest one. And that was Jim Rohn and Brian Tracy. I would hire Jim, hire Brian, hire Augmandino. Got to work with the great Augmandino. And in 1993, Jim said, and Jim was my favorite speaker. Just he had such an influence when I started listening to his stuff, which didn't happen until after I got in the seminar business. Someone gave me a cassette tape and said, hey, listen to this guy. And I'm like, whoa, that's unbelievable. So once I went out on my own, that was my first goal, is to book Jim. And then Brian had a big impact on my life. And, but Jim in 1993 said, hey, Kyle, for this next event, me and my business partner broke up. So just send me the check and I'll take it off the tab. He owes me $500,000. He had a broken business model. So when that event happened and I paid Jim, I said, listen, I think you're the best speaker in the world. I'm a pretty good promoter. I've got this figured out. I would love I'd love an opportunity to have an exclusive to represent you. And we talked about it. Jim was pretty gun shy, but we did a handshake. He said, okay. And Rob, I said, listen, since your partnerships haven't worked out, and they hadn't, even Tony Robbins that used to work for Jim during Adventures in Achievement, Jim will say, we were filling up all these rooms. And after we lost 800,000, we finally shut it down. So there were these failed business models with his partners. So I said, here's what we'll do. I'll pay for everything off the top out of my pocket because I was making money doing the events. And I'll just pay you off the top like a speakers bureau. And then give me permission, but give me exclusive and I'll go all in. And then let me go create products and I'll pay you a royalty on the products, but I'll just foot the tab for everything. So that way there's no risk. No one's going to owe you money when it's all said and done. And, I don't think he was impressed. I sold him. And so he's like, okay, we'll give it a shot. And it was really miraculous. That first year I took him from 20 speaking dates to 110, tripled his speaking fee. And Jim didn't have a list. So it wasn't like I got this list to call from. But fortunately, doing the events I had done, I was really good about keeping up with. This was pre-internet, but I had everyone's mailing address, and we were connecting with big companies, to go fill up a room. And so I just went at it and actually had a strategy that helped me lock in all the promoters around the country. And that's a story for another day, which was really helped break it all open. But that led to creating the little treasury of quotes, the excerpt booklet that I moved 6 million of, right? And like when I was on Brian Buffini's podcast, Brian said, I probably bought 200,000 of those. I'm like, I remember. Yeah, over a period of like 10 years, he was constantly ordering them. But that was a God download too. And so this was how do I book Jim's schedule up? Well, it's this whole thing called the wheel. How do you get people on the wheel and take them around? And the core of the wheel is, was Jim Rohn and his message. And the thing about Jim is he was such a wordsmith that how do I get his quotes out to the marketplace? And of course, Rob, he didn't have a list of quotes. There's no list. This is just him being a philosopher. He's talking and this incredible brilliance is coming out. So I started collecting those. And that led to the hardback of that book, but also this little quote book that had a to and a from. And that was me. That didn't exist in 1993. I call it a God whisper. And I empowered, this is a marketing lesson. How can you empower your advocates to go tell the story? And that's the thing about Jim. People loved him and they wanted to share his message. They just didn't know how to do it. There's no way to reach him. And so this was a way to empower my advocates to go buy these and give them away, just like Brian did, like Eric Worre did, like so many people. They bought 10 or 100, and I sold them that way. I sold them at such a discounted price. But the second part of that story is we were getting people into, booking Jim for these companies. I got him through, and I'm like, well, I built this amazing relationship with this company. Can I take someone else through? Can I take Brian Tracy through? Can I take Les Brown through? Can I take Dennis Waitley, Nito Quabine, Bob Berg? And so I started another company called Your Success Store. And I started booking all these other speakers through Your Success Store. And back then, when you book Jim for a 10,000 person event, you got a fee, and the fee was great, but you made your money really on the product packages. So when I would book Les Brown or Bob Berg or Dennis or Brian, yes, we made money on the front end, like a speakers bureau, 25%. But the real potential was to sell, $100 a person of product. And I would do a product split with these speakers. And, we did that really up until like the big Peter Lower event started kind of changing the public seminar business model. But about that same time, the internet came around. And so I was probably the first guy to build a 1 million+ email list. And I had launched the Jim Rohn e-zine in 1999, but then also launched the Your Success Store e-zine and messages from the masters and quotes from the masters. And so like when we're talking and I bring up Jeffrey Gitomer, or bring up Bob Berg, these are guys I was booking them for events. I was selling their product. I was leveraging their quotes. And so these are, 30-year friends that we have done a lot of business together.
That's incredible. I got to ask you, Kyle, thank you for sharing that, man. How was that first call, to Jim Rohn? What was that like?
The first call to Jim Rohn, I had the experience before I left that company of being able to book Jim for that.
Okay.
And so I got to meet him as an employee for someone else. And when I ended up leaving that company, I went through the same person I left to book Jim. So I booked Jim through somebody else.
Uh-huh.
But I had gotten to know Jim at the events. And then it's when Jim said, "Hey, Kyle, me and my partner have broken up. He owes me $500,000. That's the first time we really had a business conversation. And back then, Rob, cell phones, they were a thing, but they weren't like they are now. And so every city I would go to, I would cut a deal with the local phone company. And I had one number that followed me around and I would forward it. And Jim had that one number. And he called me. I'll never forget. I'm driving in Kansas City and, "Hey, Kyle, Jim Rohn here." And the thing is, it was great. And things like that type of relationship, it's like any kind of relationship. It's just the beginning. And there's a lot of ups and downs and a lot of uncertainty. Like we had a handshake. And so if I had to describe the essence of our relationship, it was what Jim Rohn talks about, and that's bring value. So I tried to just bring so much value, and he brought value, unbelievable amounts of value. And because of that, we had an ongoing relationship. And it wasn't about, a contract. It wasn't about, there's ups and downs. I mean, there were times of uncertainty because I was the new kid on the block. But as long as you keep bringing value and keep showing up, things are going to work out for you.
Yeah, the first I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm thinking of a new thing I have going right now with somebody. And all I'm going to do is just bring so much value. They're just going to want to keep showing up instead of trying to get certainty on the front end. You just bring so much value that it unfolds. And that's what I had to do with Jim. I had to not seek assurance. I had to just bring value.
And you seem to do that over and over again. So like Jim Rohn was like, he your first, I hate to use the word litmus test, but you did that with him. And then was there any apprehension on like, hey, how can I get the next guy, the Les Brown, the Brian Tracy, or like you knew I got this?
I think once I had Jim, I wasn't trying to have another Jim. I was just now operating more like a speakers bureau. So Jim was I had 100% exclusivity with Jim, and I didn't seek that with anyone else. Years later, I did it with Ron White and Dennis Waitley and Chris Widener and some others. Then they all came to me, but it wasn't something I think, again, I had opportunities to do exclusives with many people, but it just wasn't the same. I mean, I felt I had the best speaker in the world with Jim Rohn. Yeah. So that's where we put all our attention and effort. And then if someone wanted a certain speaker, I had a stable, if you will, of speakers. And if they were available, I could book them.
Well, so that first seminar that you did when you were on your own, that first one, were you nervous about how many people were going to show up?
Oh yeah, I mean that was Atlanta. We got 1,300 people. That was actually Brian Tracy and Ogmandino.
Okay.
So when I left that company, I could get Jim Rohn. It took me 3 cities before I could get Jim, and I had to pay a lot more money through the guy that I was working with.
That's great. What about so Kyle? I don't know if we could sidetrack a little bit. So
Sure.
you got some projects going on. You've had a lot of projects, and
By the way, I got
let's.
my Brian B. Thinking cup here. That's
So
not intentional. That's not intentional. Just that's the one I grabbed this morning.
that's funny. I should have grabbed my better than you think cup, but because I got one of those cups. So yeah, so you got a lot of projects going on. I don't know. We can go into. I want to go since you got the books behind you. Can we get into the books and then we talk about the some of like your keys to marketing and whatnot? You okay with that?
Yeah, whatever you want to do.
Yeah, sure. So Kyle, I met him from the audience out there. I met him about 2-3 years ago. And what happened, Kyle? I think I've told you this story. Like, I got a couple guys. We do a mastermind together, and they know that I got this passion, like to speak and write, maybe, and all this stuff. And I want to get out there. And my buddy goes, it was December of like 4 or 5 years ago. My buddy says, you got to get a hold of that guy that took Jim Rohn to the top. Who's that guy? That's the guy you got to connect with. And so we eventually connected. I reached out, and then we reached out again, and finally we connected. And then Kyle has this one big or several big projects wrapped around a collaboration of authors doing these books. And like one of your I think your most recent book is Lessons from the Thought Leaders. But what happens is Kyle has the celebrity authors or guests that write chapters, and he has other people to come and write chapters. And like the last one, I think you were #1 Amazon in 88 categories. Is that correct?
No.
So where was that? Tell me about that, God Whisper.
Yeah, so I actually did Chicken Soup for the Entrepreneur Soul back in the late 90s. So Mark Victor Hansen was a guy that I started putting on a lot of my stages. So I do a Jim Rohn 2-day, and Mark is like the opposite of Jim. They're just two totally different things. And I would use Mark for my Saturday morning. Jim would call it hurricane that rips through town, So Mark comes in, mind expanding. And from there, one day, Chicken Soup had just taken off, and Mark said, Kyle, you pick any topic. It's yours. But me and Jack are going to start doing like Chicken Soup for the women's soul. It's yours. And I said, entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur. And so I picked Chicken Soup for the Entrepreneur Soul, and ended up, we got Michael Dell, Bill Gates. I mean, it took me like 5 years to pull that book off. But I understood collaboration books, and from that experience. And so it was 2016. I had retired. I'd sold everything in 2007. Coached Darren Hardy, coached Robin Sharma, played in the stock market a little bit, did investments. And then in 2013, I was on a ski trip with Darren Hardy and John Assaraf, Eric Berman, who runs Brian Tracy, Stephen Cox, who sold his company, Get Lessons, I think for a couple $100 million. This is all before then, but it was those 4 guys who were all part of a San Diego mastermind, and Darren was my longtime friend. And I'd been working with him, helping him with him. Basically, when he became the publisher of Success, I was part of that because I sold my companies to the guy who bought Success. And I had brought Darren into another company called the TSTN, the Success Training Network, and had made Darren the president of that. And I owned that company with Mark Sparks, a guy Darren talks a lot about through what he does now. And so Darren was coming to Dallas for that. So when I did the deal to sell to Stuart Johnson Video Plus that was buying Success, it's like Darren would be the perfect guy to become the publisher. And so that had all kind of happened. And so I'm on this ski trip with those guys. And I thought we were going to be talking life and philosophy, and they're talking business. And I've been retired now for 6 or 7 years, and I got the itch again. And I'm like, it's not really practical for me to come to San Diego based on my circumstances of just, I wasn't doing much. And they said, you should start a mastermind in Dallas. And so that led me to starting a mastermind, Rob. And simultaneously, I started one in California. So Dallas and LA. And one of my LA members, she was an actress, Erica Dela Cruz. And I just saw her hustle. I saw her philosophy. I saw she was a millennial, 25. And I was inspired by the very thing I had, worked with Jim Rohn, and that's just show up, bring value, don't try and, just over deliver. And I watched her do that over and over. So one day I said, I have an idea of how, instead of out hunting like an actress has to do, instead of competing against 500 other actresses, how can you get people to come to you? How can you fish instead of hunt? How can you attract instead of pursue? And I said, I think if you were empowered with a book, because I'd already sold over 1 million books as a publisher. I published all of Jim's, not all of them, but several of Jim's books. And I'd outsold Simon & Schuster or Random House because I used the books to market. Like I knew how to use them in a way to build a business. And did Dennis Waitley's Safari to the Soul and some other titles. So I understood publishing and the power of a book and the power of giving away a book. So I came up with the idea, and she said, I got the title. It's called Passionistas. So we ended up having about 30 women, mostly Southern California, New York, entertainment, fashion. And I was just inspired by their hustle and their, just their fearlessness in the midst of, it's tough being an entrepreneur. Mm-hmm. And however they got there, they were probably sold it would be a lot easier than it was. And so just seeing their resolve, their resilience, I was inspired. So I knew part of my deal was I was going to make them all #1 best-selling authors. I knew how to promote it. I knew how to publish it, how to do all the little tricks, but I decided let's start doing some calls and I'll teach them how to market. I'll teach them how to build a list. I had made my fortune on building a list, not just going into a city like all my competition did. All of my promoter competition go into a city and try and get as much out of it as they could and leave. Mine was go into a city, serve, just so much what you do with real estate, become, build a relationship and stay in touch. And, so from that, we ended up doing maybe 4 calls. And after that, it worked. And I got a phenomenal editor. She's still with me to this day. 8 years later, she was in that book, Dakar Sites. She's a phenomenal writing coach, phenomenal editor. I know how to market. I have experience on, thing about Chicken Soup is how do you connect? And then you add me as a strategist. How do you also tell your story in a way that you're going to attract the right people? And then I realized, I can make phone calls. I can get Darren Hardy maybe to be in a book, or Les Brown, or Brian Tracy, or Phil Collins of Def Leppard. So 100 million albums. Phil's been in 4 of my books. Incredible. And so for someone to be in a book and be able to say, like the book you were in, I think Tom Ziegler and Layla Delia and Navy SEALs and all kinds of stuff. So to be able to name drop like if someone's a huge rock star or a huge rock fan, or someone's a huge, like Chris Gronkowski has been 3 of my books, Brothers Rob, Chris was on Shark Tank, played in the NFL. So we have multiple celebrity authorities, athletes, entertainers, musicians, and personal development, Les Brown, all of them. And that gives our authors some credibility, but it also helps them, not have to lead with themselves, but to lead with the other person. We donate 100% of our sales to charity. And, we really feel like we're giving our authors something powerful. Like when I went on the Brian Buffini podcast, I gave away one of our books. That turned into like 800 people sending me an email wanting that free book, Success Habits of Super Achievers, which had Darren and Brian and all these Phil Collins. And the newest book, Lessons from Thought Leaders, again, it's loaded with all these big names, over 21 celebrity authorities. But the key to this is it's not just send an article, as you know. This is like we have 3 to 4 drafts. It's an 8-month process. We really teach our authors how to tell a story, much like Chicken Soup, and then how to leverage the story, which a big part of that is owning your story. So often we diminish our story. And Rob, it's never failed. I don't care who it is. If an author tells their story, everyone they know is going to learn something new. even maybe your spouse. Like when
Yeah.
because we take you through, it's not just telling the highlights, it's telling the losses, it's being authentic, it's being vulnerable. You have permission to go there on all levels. And, we talk about who's your avatar, who do you want to talk to on the story, what's your priorities to make it strategic, and what's your passion to get out to the world. And when people read your story, it can be a lifelong friend, and you're going to share something they didn't know. And that creates connection, that creates a bond. And our average author's now been in 3 or more books. About 30% of our authors have done their own book. And, they all become #1 best-selling authors. So it's something I really love. And we don't charge that much, like people think it's going to be crazy numbers, but it really has almost been a gateway drug to my inner circle. So
yeah, it has.
About my inner circle, I'm like, if they've never been in a book, I can just almost blow them away with the book. Like every book fills up with just referrals.
Yeah.
Previous authors and referrals.
And like you said, it leads to the inner circle piece. Because so I met you, I got in one of the books, Next Level of Your Life. Then I got invited to your inner circle, and I've been to 4 or 5 of them, and I have never been disappointed, as you know, and as I've told you. And it's just the people, whether they're the celebrity authors or an author that's not a celebrity, they're still a celebrity in their own mind, or in your mind or my mind, and because they're inspiring, and like you said, they're authentic. And it's you said the key word. I thought you said you got to own your story.
Yes.
And tell me, what does that mean to own your story?
Yeah, I think we so often diminish our story. And I'm an example of that. I always talk about Colonel Tim Cole, 31-year colonel in the Marines, ran a presidential inauguration. And you would never know it because he's very, very humble. But at the same time, you can't help as many people if you are hiding your story behind a bushel, And I did the same. I sold my companies. I built this mini empire, had the love of a lot of people you mentioned early on, the Darren Hardys of the world. And yet no one on Facebook would even have known it, and no one I went to high school with knew it. And I went to my 20th or whichever one it was. No one knew it. I was diminishing my story. But once I started owning my story, and it was simply because I would occasionally put myself out there and someone would thank me. Thank you for sharing that. That made I could relate to that. Now, equally, some people thought I was being arrogant or bragging. And I rejoice. I really do. Every time, because I'm maxed out on friends on Facebook. I rejoice every time someone unfriends me, honestly, because I don't need to. It's fine, because that's just making the room for me to accept another friend request. I don't mean that in any other way than the truth of we're not for everybody. And it's not everyone's going to get who you are or appreciate who you are, but there are people who need you, who need your message. And when we can authentically own our story, something very powerfully happens. We cross a line of being apologetic, diminishing ourselves, into a place of empowerment. And that empowerment is when the light starts to shine. And now we're putting something out there, and you never know who's gonna respond to it. My last inner circle at my house, you spoke. It was so powerful. Dan Armstrong spoke, and it was so powerful. It's the first time I've ever had Dan speak. Everyone's blown away. They're blown away when you have spoken. And that opens the door for other people to say, Rob, I didn't know that. And they start connecting with you, right? But that's not going to happen if we're hiding. And so to go out to the marketplace in a book with these other celebrities out there, but on the other side of that, empowerment.
Yeah, and so thank you for that, because you've given me that opportunity, and I think I've connected, because like you say, own the story, and I'm like, I was scared to death. I didn't know anybody, and you said you gave me the opportunity, and I was intimidated. But then once as it's gone, month after month or meeting after meeting, I'm like, I've gotten real comfortable, and I've connected with these people. So I'm grateful for that. So Kyle, you mentioned 2 or 3 things I wanted to bring up because recently did a video and we talked about like marketing strategies, and you're the genius, you're the guy, right? And I think you mentioned 3 things in the beginning. You talked about the importance of marketing. It's about social proof, and you said this already: fishing versus hunting, and putting yourself out there. Those 3 topics, right? You've talked a little bit about fishing versus hunting already, and you alluded to putting yourself out there. Talk to me about the social proof piece.
Yeah, I think it's really called connecting the dots. So, you and I could talk and didn't know you, but then you're from Baltimore. Okay, I lived in Baltimore at one time. We start finding, okay, you're a huge fan of Brian Buffini. Okay, I know Brian, right? I'm a huge fan as well. You're part of Darren Hardy's circle. Well, Darren's one of my best friends. So and then vice versa. I'm talking Jim Rohn. Jim Rohn impacted your life. So if I do a presentation, I have these 7 marketing strategies. And number 5 is your website and social proof. And, Jeffrey Gitomer has a great quote. He came to my Philly inner circle and he said, "Hey, Kyle, where do you live?" And I'm like, "Well, Jeffrey, you know where I live. I'm in Texas." He goes, "Yeah, give everyone your address. Let's just go put that on Facebook, your address. They can all come knock on your door." And I'm like, "Okay." And he goes, "No, what's your website? What's your social handles? That's where you live. You live 24/7 on your website." And I thought that is so, so good. And so on my website, I talk about 4 things you need at the top of the fold. And one of them is social proof. One of them is a mystique. When I did JimRohn.com back in 1999, these same 4 existed then. If I look at it now with fresh eyes, it's still the same 4. And number 1 is you want a mystique. Number 2 is you don't want paragraphs. You want 2 or 3 bullets that say what you do. So let's say you do 10 things. Get it down to 3 and make those 3 the most important thing for the people you're reaching. As much as I love Phil Collin of Def Leppard, and we spent a lot of time together. I've been to his house multiple times. He did a mastermind at my house. We've been backstage. That's not my avatar. Def Leppard's not my avatar. Phil's just an amazing human being. My avatar is Jim Rohn and Darren Hardy and Brian. I've probably done 50 events with Brian Tracy. Brian's by far the second biggest influence in my life. Dennis Waitley, we've done 4 retreats in a row. Most amazing human. Those are my avatars. So I need to have that somewhere at the top of the fold. And if you are a Darren Hardy fan and you see the testimonial from Darren, I have 2. One's like, I'm the solution for every marketing situation he's had, made him lots of money. And another one's a 1.5-minute video on my Instagram page where he's saying, I'm the guy. Well, that's gold, right? And Darren doesn't do testimonials, by the way, because you and I know they don't exist. You don't see them. So when he was on my podcast, that's the only podcast he's been on 7 years. So if someone's a big Darren Hardy fan, and there are lots, social proof's incredible. Now, if someone doesn't know that, never mind, right?
Right.
So when people ask me, what do I do? What's that? I don't know, right? And I'm in the mood to play. A lot of times I don't want to talk about what I do. And that's just the way it is. If I'm playing pickleball, let's play pickleball.
Right.
It's if it's an event or something, I'll say, well, have you ever heard of Jim Rohn? And they say, no. Okay. You ever heard of Tony Robbins? No. You ever heard of Zig Ziglar? No. Ever heard of Chicken Soup for the Soul? No. I say I sell magazines. I don't even try, because they're just not, we're in 2 different worlds. But if they know who Jim is, it's over, because I got to spend incredible amounts of time with Jim, and I was his partner and owned Jim Rohn International and the whole thing. They know who Darren is or Brian. So social proof is huge because it helps connect the dots. So if you're the number 1 realtor, or you had this award, or you went to Notre Dame and you have this credential, whatever it is, whatever that social proof is. And I could go a lot deeper into it, but and so it's got to show up on your Instagram. It's got to show up on your Facebook page occasionally. It's got to show up on your website. It's got to show up in your speech. If you have 2 examples in a speech, and one is you spoke at a company, that is whatever, That's one example. And the other example is the president of somebody that's really important heard your talk, called you, said, Rob, we'd love to have you come speak. So you went to speak to 500 VIPs. You're going to tell that story. That's going to be the story you give the example.
Right.
You're going to give the example of the people you coach that are doing, the professional baseball player. We'll say baseball in your case, right? Those are the examples you give. So you try and figure out what's going to connect the dots with your audience that you're talking to based on your history. And they're out there. And a lot of times we forget it. You just got to just do a little bit of inventory.
Yeah, it's been fun for me with the podcast, meeting you and meeting some of these other guests, and just connecting those dots. And like I feel like I'm in a different sandbox now. I'm in a different playground. I'm in a playground with these people, and it's been like just over the last 2 or 3 years, and I've been a little more intentional. And as you say, like in number 3 of these 3 things, you said put yourself out there. God, I was scared to death. I was like scared, insecurity, whatever you want to call it, but put yourself out there, because sometimes you worry about what other people think, and that has been my biggest thing over the years. So you put yourself out there a long time ago. Was that like, how much fear was there when you put yourself out there, or maybe you didn't have any?
Yeah, I think it's a little different. When we're saying put yourself out there, we're doing a lot of it in the context of social media or out in the marketplace. Mine was much more covert, or, mine was much more like I would do a huge event, film it. Like some of my biggest events, like in LA, I did one with Jim, Brian Tracy, Dennis Waitley, had 10 speakers, 3 days. It's Hollywood film crew, 2,000 people. I never introduced anyone. I was executive. It was my event. I filled it up. I collected all the money. I paid all the money. Jim didn't even know we were filming it. I was trying to make another $1 million later off film, which we did. But I didn't want my name out there, because I knew everyone in the room wanted to be Jim. I didn't have time I'd already built the $1 million+ list. So I'm getting bombarded by everyone. Everyone wants me to sell their product. Everyone wants me to be their agent. So I would hide. So that's different, right? But now, after selling the companies, coming out of retirement, selling the $1 million+ list, it's 2014. I decided I want to do this for all the right reasons. And also know the value of an audience, because you can't fish if you don't have something to put out there to a certain group of people, unless you're buying ads. I didn't want to buy ads. Because ads are cold traffic. I wanted organic traffic. And I said the quickest way to get there is social media. So like it or not, I have to tell my story, and I have to own my story. Own the good, own the bad. But owning the good, yes, you will get pushback. Some people will be envious. Some people won't get it. And you have to be okay with that. If bigger than that is, who are the people you can positively impact? So what I tell people is, how much influence do you want to have? It's just that simple. If you don't want any influence, yeah, by all means, stay private. But if you want to impact more people, you have to put yourself out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's powerful. And I remember having a conversation. I got introduced to John Gordon a few years ago, and I called him up, and we were talking about this topic. And I said, well, how much posting's too much? He goes, Rob, you just put it out there. You put yourself out there, and you don't worry about it. Some people are going to not like you. Some people are going to like you. It's who you want to impact. He basically said the same thing. So thank you. That's an affirmation there. So Kyle, we got a little bit of time left. The marketing wheel. Do you want to get into that at all? You have some a few minutes to talk about your marketing wheel?
Yeah, we can. Yeah, on the 7 strategies, the first one I talk about connecting the dots, and that's a whole thing. Number 2 is tactics versus principles. And tactics are constantly changing based on technology. And so the tactics it took to fill up a room in 1993 are different than 2000, or different than 2007, which is different than 2016 when I put on the Brian Tracy 20-year anniversary of the Success Master Academy, which Darren did speak at, came, as my friend to speak at that. And it's different than what I do now. But the principles never change. And so I consider myself a principle-based marketer. And just a side note, because this does play into the wheel, I think people are doing too many tactics. They're overwhelmed with tactics. So when I say social media, it doesn't have to work for you. You don't have to work for it. You can let it just pick the things that make the most sense. And it's a whole, we should just offer people the opportunity to get the video. Honestly, I did 80 minutes on this. So we'll figure out how to do that. But, well, they can email. So we'll talk about that at the end. They can email.
Sure.
But I go into all that. But the will. And so number 3 is being strategic. And I learned this a long time ago. If I'm going to go into Baltimore, there's 50 things I could do. I could even look at classified ads in the newspaper. I mean, you could put business cards on windshields. You can do everything. But there's there's 2 or 3 that make the biggest difference. And so I'm always asking, and this was way before the book, The One Thing, was written, by Gary.
Right.
I knew back then, what's the one thing that will knock down all the dominoes? So I'm always asking that. It always gets down to what's the one thing that will move the needle the most, and be willing to say no to all the rest. Darren talks about that. So the will is something in 1993 when Jim and I partnered. I drew a circle on a sheet of paper. I'll never forget it. I put a little hub in the middle. I drew these spokes, and each spoke was a product or service Jim already had. He had a 1-day seminar. He had a 2-day. He had a book. He had audio. And my thought was, how do I get people on the wheel and take them around? And the biggest question is, how do I get them on the wheel? He had no list. This is before the internet. And that's where I came up with the little quote book. And I had the mailing address of all the seminars I'd had Jim speak. So I had that going for me. And then the other way, so I had 2 ways I could build the wheel and get people on the wheel. And it was this: empower his advocates, find the big Jim Rohn fans and sell these for 60 cents each, and people are like, God, this could sell for $5. It's leatherette, it's gold. I'm like, that's not my purpose. My purpose is, how do I empower my advocates? But the other thing is, I got to get Jim on stages. And that's where I went to every promoter, made them an unbelievable deal, and actually did something that was very bold. I told them, either they book Jim to come into Chicago, or I'm going to come into Chicago and compete against them with Jim and Brian. So Brian Tracy did me the biggest favor of all time. 1993, he agreed to let me book him and Jim for a 1-day, even if he had promoters in that city, as long as it was 6 months before or after an existing event. And he would let me come in, and they were charging $200, $300, $400 for an all-day Brian. And I said, I'm going to come in with Jim and Brian for $99. I'm going to kick your ass. Or you can book Jim to come in and speak. Uh-huh. And within 6 months, I had every city in America booked with that promoter.
Yeah.
And I actually tested it. I went to DC and did it. I said, I'm about to do this in DC, and I'm going to do it in every city, take Brian and Jim. Uh-huh. And when the dominoes fell, it fell. So that's a story I never tell.
Yeah.
But that was ignorance. I was in this bubble, and we pulled it off. But on the wheel, the key question for people are, what spokes should you have on the wheel? So I have 5 criteria for that, and maybe that should just wait for the video. But
yeah, for sure.
I'll throw in really fast. Is it part of your core business? I never do one-offs. Is it strategic? Is it focused on your avatar? Is it part of your secret sauce? Is it what makes you special? I'm such a believer in build around what makes you special. Don't try and be someone else, because you're not. And you're going to attract the wrong people if you're trying to be someone else. So be you, and that way you're attracting the right people that get you, and then make sure it's part of your goals. A lot of people, for short-term success, will not do what's really on their long-term goals. So I want to make sure everything I'm doing is so aligned with my long-term goals. It's strategic. It's the most important thing. So people that know me know that I say no a lot. I say no 49 out of 50 times. It's got to really check off all those boxes. And so the wheel, as simple as it sounds, it's very, very sophisticated, because you end up taking everything through that mindset. And if you're on a podcast, how do I get people on the wheel? If you're speaking at an event, how do I get people on the wheel? You know, we were talking about the books. I've given away the digital version of the books that you've been in, and I'll get 600 out of 1,000 people on stage to give me their email. And I'm not trying to sell them. I just put them on the wheel. And so the thing about the wheel, it's not a funnel. Funnels have agendas. The wheel is I'm going to build a relationship. I'm going to bring value. And eventually I might have an offer, you know, that you might be interested in. And if you are, great. And if you're not, that's great too. My biggest goal is just don't unsubscribe. So I'm not there with an agenda of a funnel. I'm there just to bring value. And to me, that's back to principle-based marketing. So the wheel is you get them on. And then over time, you know, over time, I feel like if you're giving great value with great product and what you offer meets the need of what the customer wants, you're going to win some.
Yeah, that's great. I think the first time we spoke, you said the key, one of the biggest keys is to bring value to valuable people. Yes. Right? You said that. And so, Kyle, as we wrap up here, I mean, how can I bring value to you today to help you build this list even bigger? I'm a little guy here, but how can I bring value to you today that helps you out here?
Well, I don't know. I'm happy to give away some of my stuff, and I got lots of cool stuff free of charge. And the biggest, I think, this new book I'm really proud of, Lessons from Thought Leaders. We have Brian Tracy, Phil Collin, Renee Marino, who was in Jersey Girl with Clint Eastwood and been on Broadway, and she's now the host of the big Aspire events and the Tony Robbins Mastermind events. Tony and Dean, she's incredible. Got Les Brown, got Chris Gronkowski, Todd Stoudemire, 15-year Major League Baseball player. I coached Todd. Mitzi Perdue, Bob Berg, author of The Go-Giver, T.C. Cummings, Navy SEAL, Kevin Eastman, who's been on your podcast. Kevin's a really good friend. He's been in 3 of my books. Tom Ziegler, Dennis Waitley. I'd love to give everyone this book, give them the Success Habits book that also has Darren and John Assaraf, Mark Victor Hansen, and all the books. The book you're in, Next Level. So there's over 10 books. There's a bunch of interviews. An interview I did with Darren Hardy for 2 hours. He gives a ton of value. Interview with Phil Collin, Brian Tracy. And all they got to do is send an email to kyle@kylewilson.com or info@kylewilson.com. Put send books, and then make sure and tell me you heard me on Rob's podcast. And if you want, I'll include the link to this 70-minute talk I recently did that we sent to the people that attended the Baltimore event.
Yeah. And I can testify to that to everybody. So it's great stuff. And Kyle, I'm just grateful to have met you. I'm grateful to be in that ballpark with you, and you've invited me in, and it's been awesome. And I look forward to it. So if anybody wanted, you said the Kyle, was it Kyle at info or info at Kyle?
Kyle@kylewilson.com. Send books. Let me know that you heard it on Rob's podcast. And also we for my inner circle, we do 14 live events, and there's an application and all that stuff. But I'm going to open up something we did for the Baltimore people, and that's it's a monthly access to all my marketing calls, all my master classes where I've had Brian Tracy. We got the most incredible people that do our master classes, hundreds of hours in our membership site, Facebook group. And you can also attend one live event, and it's a fraction of the cost of the inner circle. So if they're interested in that, just have them ask me about that in the email, and I'll send them that link. That's not, and again, none of this is you could get on my website. Like if you went to my website, there's no way to sign up for the inner circle, the book, or the thing I just mentioned. All those are applications, but on the it's $99 a month on the, call it Inner Circle Access. They get access to everything and can attend a live event as well.
And that's awful generous of you, Kyle. I appreciate it.
If they'll ask me about it, I will include that link.
Yeah. Kyle, thank you so much. I know you got to get running here, and I just appreciate your time. I'm looking forward to seeing you. Got a couple events coming up in Dallas. I don't know if you mentioned that real quick, but I plan on being on 1 or 2 of them.
Well, I actually got Memory and Marketing with Ron and I. You were kind enough to host the one in Baltimore that you and Ron did a phenomenal job. And we're going to do one in February 2021, either at my house or a place 2 blocks away. And Ron and I try and do one a year. We're not always successful, his schedule and mine, but we have a lot of fun doing them. And then we hang out with everyone. So this we'll be able to have all day of, it's 2 days, half day memory, half day marketing. I always bring a lot of special guests. Chris Gronkowski will be there. We'll have some amazing guests, and we don't charge that much. It's like $300-400. We include lunch, and we hang out each night, and it's a lot of fun. But the main thing is the value you get from it. So they can ask me about that. If they send me an email, they'll get on my email list where they'll get my propaganda. So I'm just warning you in advance. All my stuff. But it's easy enough to delete when it doesn't apply to you. So don't worry about it.
There you go.
We hadn't officially announced the memory marketing, but we will in the next couple of weeks.
There you go. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob.
Kyle, I appreciate it again. And until next time, everybody, let's go get chiseled.
Thanks, brother.